Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 133 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight we ask if somebody won't give us a bit of song.
Do not look at me, Alan, because that is not happening. I'm sorry
Trust
to say.
me, I'm not.
Actually, I'm not sorry to say that at all. I'm very happy to say it's not happening. Folks, we will
So
head
am I.
back. Everyone is. We're going to be heading back to the common room in just a moment. But first, I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who might be able to dig something out of his memory, Alan Sisto.
Well, thank you, Shawn. But if I do manage to dig something out of my memory, well, it ain't going to be what you'd call proper poetry.
Now, stop that. You're not going into a song while I'm here.
I like that. Well done.
Thank you. Well, before somebody has a chance to call the guards, it's time for a Tolkien Quote of the Day. Well, we've been seeing a lot of textual ruins these last couple of chapters. You know, Strider's been taking the hobbits through all these actual ruins of ancient kingdoms of men, and we've seen a lot of that textual ruin stuff that Tolkien gets into and that Drought talks about. We're going to get an interesting textual ruin in this episode, too, as the hobbits forget their own family history.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I've been thinking about textual ruins a lot, and here's a quote from the professor on textual ruins that I'd like to read and discuss. Now, this is from letter number 247. It's to a reader named Colonel Worsket.
Unfortunately named, I might say. Worsket. I don't know why. That just doesn't...
I know. It does kind of sound like an article of clothing and a sauce at the same time. But,
and the rank also implies that he might be in a very bad game of Clue. Colonel Worsket in the library with the
Colonel
candlestick.
Worsket in the library with a letter from his favorite author. Yeah.
All right. Poor Colonel Worsket. I apologize to any of his descendants who are listening. Go ahead.
Well, here's what Tolkien said. He said, part of the attraction of The Lord of the Rings is, I think, due to the glimpses of a large history in the background. An attraction like that of viewing, far off, an unvisited island, or seeing the towers of a distant city gleaming in a sunlit mist. To go there is to destroy the magic, unless new unattainable vistas are again revealed.
I'm afraid I know where you're going with this.
I think you might know, and it's kind of a controversial viewpoint, I have to say. I mean, well, not part of it. I mean, we'd all agree that a big part of the attraction of The Lord of the Rings is the glimpses of history that you get in the background. We talk about that all the time.
Yeah, all the time.
What I think might be controversial is this idea that to go there, that is, to actually go back and read the stories of that ancient history, is to destroy the magic, as Tolkien said. Now, I'm guessing that if you've been listening to this podcast for the last 133 episodes,
well, yeah,
you probably don't agree with that because we're destroying the magic by explaining those textual ruins all the time.
Well, we even destroy the magic when we look at the unfinished drafts, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
we
do.
Yeah.
We do, if that's how you see it. So
if that's how you see it, and
that's the question. I think, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking that there's so much there. Even still, there are textual ruins. You know, we still don't know about how Queen Beruthiel and her cats. There's a textual ruin for you that we'll never get the answer to. The Entwives.
Queen Beruthiel and her cats.
Tom Bombadil and his nature. I mean, we've got the big questions like Tom Bombadil, the side questions. There's so much that we'll never be able to destroy all the magic.
I agree. You can go back and read the Silmarillion, and you get, you get things like Eärendil explained, Beren and Luthien explained, some of that stuff. But there's still all this stuff that is not explained, even within the context of...
And new things introduced that aren't explained.
New things introduced. And that's going back to what Tolkien said about those new unattainable vistas that are revealed.
That's right.
The farther back you go, there's always more vistas out there that you can't see, things that you still don't know. What happened to Ungoliant? Where did orcs really come from? You know, there's all these questions out there that are still not revealed. And I think the fascinating thing for me, and I think I've said this in a few of our interview episodes, is the deeper I read into the Legendarium, whether I, dig deep into the history of Middle-earth, there's still unanswered questions out there that you can find that kind of keep you awake at night if you're a nerd like me.
And it does seem like every new thing you read introduces as many questions as it provides answers to other questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure somebody thought when the Silmarillion came out in 1977 that we were in a way destroying the magic of the Lord of the Rings by seeing that vista, by going to that unvisited island and the towers of the distant city. And yet it introduced so much more that I can't possibly conclude that it destroyed the magic.
I agree.
Same with even Unfinished Tales. I mean, sure, that solved and addressed a number of questions that had been left unanswered, but it also introduced more. So
Yeah, you get unanswered questions like, what really happens to Tuor after he arrives in Gondolin?
Yeah.
All these questions about, Galadriel and Celeborn that come out of unfinished tales. Even in the Silmarillion, there's things like, we don't hear anything about Eärendil's voyages. We don't hear anything about whether he actually found his parents out there on the sea. So, yeah, I think Tolkien was being a little bit too humble. I think that to go to some of those unattainable vistas in The Lord of the Rings is to suddenly find yourself in the Silmarillion. And I think there's just always new unattainable vistas to find out there.
Yeah, I really think it's that last phrase in that paragraph that you read that really is the key. Unless new unattainable vistas are again revealed.
Yep.
And that's the difference between Tolkien's Legendarium and so many other works that are out there.
Oh, yeah.
You can reach the edge of these other works.
Yeah. You start digging and you get to a point and there's just no place else to go from there.
Yeah. There's no there.
Yeah.
Right.
Nicely said. I think with Tolkien, there's always something there. There's always something beyond. There's always something over the horizon to see. And I think that is what keeps the magic alive.
I agree. Well, before we jump into our chapter discussion, we have another little correction from a recent episode. You may recall from last time that we had a few clarifications, addenda from episode 125. Well, this time we've got a brief, tiny, ever so slight correction for episode 126.
This one's so tiny, I really don't have to mention it, I don't think. Do I?
Well, it's really tiny for me because it's about you. You're not getting out of this one, though. So, Shawn, I'd recommend you just go ahead and get it over with.
Okay, fine. Here we go. In episode 126, when we talked about Merry having seen the Black Riders out in the streets of Bree, I made an offhand remark, as I sometimes do, about this being the first time Merry had seen a Black Rider. And I just said something about, that's ironic, because Merry ends up getting more up close and personal with a ringwraith than anybody else by the time the book is over, right?
About knee-high, at least, but granted, that's enough.
That's all it takes, man.
Yep.
Well, I don't know, 2 to 4 listeners, I think, pointed out something that I missed. I'm going to give the hat tip to our old friend Chris B, because his was the first email that I got. Several listeners did point out Merry has actually seen a Black Rider before. In Book 1, Chapter 5, A Conspiracy Unmasked, right as the hobbits have just gotten off the ferry on the Buckland side of the river, this happens. On the far stage, under the distant lamps, they could just make out a figure. It looked like a dark black bundle left behind. But as they looked, it seemed to move and sway this way and that, as if searching the ground. It then crawled, or went crouching, back into the gloom beyond the lamps. "What in the Shire is that?" exclaimed Merry. So, okay, yeah. Merry saw the Black Rider, and he could see it looked strange enough for him to say, "What in the Shire is that?" So, yeah, okay, I was wrong. Prior to Bree, Merry technically has seen a Black Rider. Now, of course, he's only seen it as a moving black bundle that he can just barely make out on the far side of a river, whereas the other hobbits have seen him a little closer up. So I'm going to go ahead and argue that the spirit of my statement was accurate, even if the letter wasn't quite accurate.
Fair enough.
But I'll go do my penance in the, what is it this time? It's going to be the Chamber of Casually Overstated but Nearly Accurate Facts. How about that?
I like that one. Yeah. Is that the one with the massage chair and the 80-inch 4K TV?
No, it's the one with the PlayStation and the kegerator.
Oh, okay. Well, it's not quite as nice as some of the others, but that'll do.
I'll survive.
I'm sure you will. Well, before you get too comfortable in there, let's go see some familiar sights on the road to Rivendell in the second part of Flight to the Ford.
Okay.
And we're going to go ahead and pick up a little bit after we left off last time. Morning has come, and Strider has gone off and come back. And Shawn, that's where I'm going to have you pick up.
Okay. When he returned, he was not reassuring. "We have come too far to the north," he said, "and we must find some way to turn back southwards again. If we keep on as we are going, we shall get up into the Ettendales, far north of Rivendell. That is troll country, and little known to me. We could perhaps find our way through and come round to Rivendell from the north, but it would take too long, for I do not know the way, and our food would not last. So somehow or other we must find the ford of Bruinen." The rest of that day they spent scrambling over rocky ground. They found a passage between 2 hills that led them into a valley running southeast, the direction that they wished to take. But towards the end of the day they found their road again barred by a ridge of high land. Its dark edge against the sky was broken into many bare points, like teeth of a blunted saw. They had a choice between going back or climbing over it. They decided to attempt the climb, but it proved very difficult. Before long, Frodo was obliged to dismount and struggle along on foot. Even so, they often despaired of getting their pony up, or indeed of finding a path for themselves, burdened as they were. The light was nearly gone, and they were all exhausted when at last they reached the top.
Not a pleasant start to the day.
No, not at all.
So first, Aragorn gets the lie of the land, and they've come too far north. I couldn't help it when I saw the line, "We must find the ford of Bruinen." I kept thinking, come on down to Bruinen Ford by your next expedition or explorer, or for our European listeners, by your next Mondeo at Ford of Bruinen.
Wow.
Which, of course, made me think about Ford Prefect and how he thought that was going to be a perfect.
Yeah, of course. That's perfect. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm so sorry. I digress already, but
I'm kind of surprised you brought up the Ford Explorer, but not the Ford Mustang, since after all, this is the prancing pony.
It is. That's true. And I actually have a Ford Mustang, so you would think, but I think that's
as you're constantly reminding me. Yes, I know you have a Mustang.
Well, road trips are in the future for the Prancing Pony podcast.
I'm ready. It's the right color. We just need to get a big white horse to slap on the side of it. So the Ettendales. That's where
the Ettendales. That is where we left off. Once again, digressing. The Ettendales.
So the Ettendales, not exactly the same as the Etten Moors, right?
Right.
Because in his unfinished index to Lord of the Rings, Tolkien described the Ettendales as the dales or valleys of the Etten Moors.
Okay.
So it's actually the dales or the valleys of the moors.
Oh, okay.
We talked last time about how in an early version, one of the earlier drafts, this area was originally called the Entish Dales or Entish Lands. And we talked about the relationship between the words Etten and Ent. So go check out last episode if you missed that.
Definitely. And so would the valleys then sort of be before you get to the moors themselves?
That's what I'm assuming, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's the valleys... It's sort of the foothills of the moors or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that must be. Well, it's interesting to note, I know we just talked about finding the Ford of Bruinen, but even Strider, who knows this area very well, is really hard put to it to find it from here.
Yeah, that's
true. We're going to touch on that at more length in Bartleman's Bag, but we wanted to at least bring that up.
Yep. Very good. So they do find a valley that heads in the right direction, but that ends up being a dead end.
Right.
They try to climb. Even Frodo has to get off the pony.
Yep. They get to the top. They're utterly exhausted. I mean, Frodo having to get off and struggle along on foot and trying to figure out how they're even going to get the pony up because it's so steep and so difficult. And it's taken them almost the entirety of the day. The light was nearly gone when they get to the top.
And poor Frodo. I mean, I know I don't read this next part, but I mean, he throws himself down. He's cold.
Oh, yeah.
His left arm is lifeless.
Yep.
He feels as if icy claws are in his side and shoulder. I mean, that's dark stuff. I mean, the shadow really is infecting him.
Well, remember we talked about earlier in last week's episode how the pain was increasing, but he didn't say anything about it.
Right.
I think this is, it's getting even worse, and it's going to continue to do so.
Yeah.
And we're not going to read this paragraph too, but Merry expresses some serious concern. Can he even be cured? He asks Strider. And that's where I'm going to pick up just a very short segment. "We shall see," answered Strider. "There is nothing more than I can do in the wilderness, and it is chiefly because of his wound that I am so anxious to press on. But I agree that we can go no further tonight." "What is the matter with my master?" asked Sam in a low voice, looking appealingly at Strider. "His wound was small, and it is already closed. There's nothing to be seen but a cold white mark on his shoulder." "Frodo has been touched by the weapons of the enemy," said Strider. "And there is some poison or evil at work that is beyond my skill to drive out. But do not give up hope, Sam."
Do not give up hope, Sam.
I love that.
The man whose name is Estelle, Hope.
Yeah. Do not give up me, Sam.
Doesn't sound quite as beautiful when you say it like that.
A little less humble there.
Yeah. But, we've talked a little bit about how Strider's sort of teaching the hobbits. He's trying to give them a little crash course in survival and in, in the tools that they're going to need if they're going to complete this quest. And I think one of those is kind of, he has this calmness about him, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He takes it all in. He takes it all in. And
sorry.
He should, I guess. Yeah, maybe that's why he got his name.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Probably not, but maybe.
Probably, you never know.
You're right. He's very unruffled. He doesn't panic. He doesn't freak out.
Yes, he just takes everything in. He's kind of calm and zen about everything. And the hobbits need to learn some of that because they're kind of on this emotional roller coaster right now. Merry's freaked out. Sam's freaked out. Pippin's just confused.
Pippin's just Pippin. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So they need this. And I love that this is something that he's sort of teaching by his example. Like, let's just remain calm in the crisis. And he's got a good read on the situation. I know he's injured. That's why I'm in a rush. But we can't go any further tonight.
Yeah.
Let's just do what we can. And most importantly, do not give up hope. I love that.
Right. We are close to Rivendell. If we can get there in time, then we don't have to give up hope. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. You're right. That's a valuable survival skill. And certainly he is demonstrating that by example. He's not giving in to panic or anxiety or any of these other things that we hear the other characters mentioning. I mean, Merry talks himself. He says, I'm dreadfully anxious about him.
Yeah, and we see the word anxiety later on. I noticed it. I mean,
Sam is looking appealingly to him. And this is not the first time that Sam's been a little worried.
Yeah.
Understandably so. But Strider's point here is just, let's do what we can. And what we can't do, we can't worry about. We're just going to keep moving to Rivendell to try to get what we need.
Yeah. Good leadership. Really good leadership from Strider.
It is good leadership.
I would vote for him for king.
You don't vote for a king.
See, there you go. Well, how'd you become king then?
How
many minutes in, and we've already gotten a Monty Python reference out of it.
Seriously, it doesn't take long, folks. That means somebody out there is already buzzed. For those unaware of what I'm
the drinking game.
The drinking game. Apparently, after our most recent episode, which was a Discord live in front of our studio audience episode, they came up with some drinking game rules because of how we do our show. And they thought it would be hilarious to...
because of our tendency to sort of repeat the same gags and jokes.
Well, right.
Have the same reactions to certain things. Yeah.
We go to the Monty Python and the Holy Grail a lot. We go to the Princess Bride a lot. We go to Hitchhiker's Guide
We know all the well-trodden paths to all of our favorite wells, and we do not stray.
No, we don't. Hey, I know this path. I'm going down this one. And so, of course, they decided that would be comical. I think actually what it's cirrhosis causing is what it is. It's not.
We do not condone.
No. Let's be very clear.
We do not.
We recommend that if you follow the rules of the recently released drinking game for the Prancing Pony podcast, you do so with a non-alcoholic beverage. Else, you will not remember you listened to the show,
That's right.
And you will be caught in a never-ending loop of listening to the same episode, drinking, and listening to the same episode over and over,
and never quite getting it. It's not sinking in. I don't know why. I can't remember it. I keep seeming to black out. I don't know why.
Until you end up on the liver transplant list, and things just go very badly from there.
We don't want that.
No. And by all means, do not listen to this podcast while you're driving if you are playing the game.
No, please. Please do not.
All right. That's our PSA for the day.
There's our PSA for the day.
So, lacking any drinking game or alcoholic beverages for that matter, the hobbits and Strider are on the top of a ridge, and that's where I'm going to have you pick up.
Night was cold up on the high ridge. They lit a small fire down under the gnarled roots of an old pine that hung over a shallow pit. It looked as if stone had once been quarried there. They sat huddled together. The wind blew chill through the pass, and they heard the treetops lower down moaning and sighing. Frodo lay half in a dream, imagining that endless dark wings were sweeping by above him, and that on the wings rode pursuers that sought him in all the hollows of the hills. The morning dawned bright and fair. The air was clean, and the light pale and clear in a rain-washed sky. Their hearts were encouraged, but they longed for the sun to warm their cold, stiff limbs. As soon as it was light, Strider took Merry with him and went to survey the country from the height to the east of the pass. The sun had risen and was shining brightly when he returned with more comforting news. They were now going more or less in the right direction. If they went on, down the further side of the ridge, they would have the mountains on their left. Some way ahead, Strider had caught a glimpse of the Loudwater again, and he knew that, though it was hidden from view, the road to the ford was not far from the river, and lay on the side nearest to them.
My goodness, I love the morning, and how their hearts are encouraged.
Polar opposite of the night before, really. I mean, Frodo's got this terrifying dream, which sounds more than a little bit like...
Yeah.
You can go ahead and say it.
Indeed, it presages the riders on winged mounts. I mean, this is seriously foreboding stuff right here in his dream. But
absolutely.
But it's that morning that I love. The good news that we're heading in the right direction. The rain-washed sky, everything's clean again.
That's a lovely image, the rain-washed
Isn't
sky. Clean. I like. Yeah, I mean, it does say that in the text, but I like that you're calling that out. Everything seems clean again.
It's a smell too. You can feel that in the air when you get that rain-washed sky.
Yeah,
it's a lovely thing, especially in the woods like this. I imagine it's a lovely fragrance. All the pines and just a wonderful place to be at this point. Though, of course, they'd far rather be in Rivendell.
Well, sure.
Certainly, Frodo would be.
Yeah. But at least their hearts are encouraged here. This beautiful morning does kind of give them, a little bit of hope, a little bit of recovery from this fresh, clean morning. Yeah,
and Strider's able to see the Loudwater from there, and that's really big because that gives us a bearing, a place to go, a sense of where we need to go. So, of course, they decide that they've got to make for the road. They can't stay in the hills anymore. And then they climb down, and eventually they do get down a path. I love the little line, we're not going to read it, but about the... poor old pony, Bill's old pony, which still is unnamed at this point, actually does have a talent for picking out the right path. I thought that was pretty neat.
That's true. Sparing its rider as many jolts as possible. I like that.
Yeah.
Even the pony's on their side,
That's right. He's helping out as best he can.
He's so happy he's not with Fernie anymore. I mean,
Who wouldn't be?
Well, yeah.
I mean, really, like we've said, his life with Fernie must have been pretty bad.
Even Frodo felt better in the morning light.
Isn't that great?
But there's a flip side to that. Every now and again, a mist seemed to obscure his sight.
Yeah.
So
I know we said we weren't going to read that paragraph, but we basically did.
I know.
Oops. It's okay. No, don't worry about it. Don't worry. I mean, it's important stuff. I mean, believe me, I wish we could read each and every paragraph and break down each and every paragraph, but we're not allowed to. So we won't. But I am going to go ahead and pick up here. Pippin was a little ahead of the others. Suddenly, he turned round and called to them. "There is a path here," he cried. When they came up with him, they saw that he had made no mistake. There were clearly the beginnings of a path that climbed with many windings out of the woods below and faded away on the hilltop behind. In places it was now faint and overgrown, or choked with fallen stones and trees, but at one time it seemed to have been much used. It was a path made by strong arms and heavy feet. Here and there old trees had been cut or broken down, and large rocks cloven or heaved aside to make a way. They followed the track for some while, for it offered much the easiest way down, but they went cautiously, and their anxiety increased as they came into the dark woods, and the path grew plainer and broader. Suddenly, coming out of a belt of fir trees, it ran steeply down a slope, and turned sharply to the left round the corner of a rocky shoulder of the hill. When they came to the corner, they looked round, and saw that the path ran on over a level strip under the face of a low cliff overhung with trees. In the stony wall there was a door, hanging crookedly ajar upon one great hinge. Well.
That's an interesting image.
Here. Yeah, it is.
So they've headed down the ridge. Getting a little bit easier than expected. There's not as much of a slope, and the pony knows what he's doing. We talked about that a little bit. There was this little path that they were able to find, right? And the path was made by strong arms and heavy feet, which I can only hope belong to ordinary human linebackers and not some sort of monster.
I'm sure they all, right, exactly. There's a big population of retired NFL linebackers in the Ettendales area.
Yeah. No. It could be
Pretty sure it's probably monsters.
It doesn't have to be monsters.
We're not saying it's monsters, but it's monsters.
But it's monsters. Let's hope it's not monsters. But, we are seeing, again, this roller coaster of emotions. There's a little bit of despair for a moment. There's fear. There's hope. Now we get some anxiety in here.
Yeah.
But
the dark woods, as the path grows plainer and broader.
Yep.
In between the shrubberies. Sorry.
A little path between the shrubberies.
In the middle. Yeah. But that's two-level effect.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's awesome.
Sorry about that. Not sorry.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah,
awesome stuff. But they get down to this cliff wall, and this door is hanging open.
Yeah. Vivid description of the path and the way they get around and see it, right? You come down a slope, you turn around the corner of the kind of the base of the hill, the shoulder of the hill, and then the path goes over this strip, and you can see it, really, under this little cliff overhang, right? You've got this cliff, trees are hanging over the top of it, but in the wall of this cliff, the face of the cliff is a door, and it's ripped open. It's hanging
crookedly
on one hinge.
ajar. on one great hinge. Yeah.
A little nerve-wracking.
Quite.
Little nerve-wracking.
Yeah. But they go check it out, don't they?
They do indeed. And in fact, Pippin's convinced this is absolutely a troll hole. We got to get out of here. We know who made this path now, and we got to move. But once again, Strider with his, let's just stay calm.
Keeping cool.
And I love Strider's nonchalant response. I don't think we need be afraid.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's not worried.
I think it's going to be okay, guys. This looks like it's long abandoned, long forsaken. And I'll go ahead and pick up from there.
I think he knows something, too.
Oh, he certainly knows something. Yeah.
We'll
see in just a moment he knows something.
You go ahead and pick up.
The path went on again from the door, and turning to the right again across the level space, plunged down a thick wooded slope. Pippin, not liking to show Strider that he was still afraid, went on ahead with Merry.
Oh, Pippin.
Putting on his bravest face, you know?
That's right. I'm a big boy.
Yeah. Sam and Strider came behind, one on each side of Frodo's pony, for the path was now broad enough for 4 or 5 hobbits to walk abreast. But they had not gone very far before Pippin came running back, followed by Merry. They both looked terrified. "There are trolls," Pippin panted. "Down in a clearing in the woods not far below. We got a sight of them through the tree trunks. They are very large." "We will come and look at them," said Strider, picking up a stick. Frodo said nothing, but Sam looked scared.
Well, you know, he only has a sword hilt, so he has to grab something, I guess.
Come on. It's
That's
a
not
stick.
gonna help.
What are you going to do with a stick against large
Don't
trolls?
bring a knife to a gunfight.
Yeah.
I mean, this is
right,
this
exactly.
Is a
Don't bring
idea.
a stick to a troll fight, man. The fact that he picks up a stick so nonchalantly, that tells us that he knows something.
And I think it would explain why Sam looks even more scared.
Yeah.
All you did was pick up a stick?
All he's got is a stick, Mr. Frodo.
You're going to protect us? Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pick up right from there.
Okay.
The sun was now high. Well, there's your answer right there.
There you go.
That tells you.
Clue
number 1. And it shone down through the half-stripped branches of the trees and lit the clearing with bright patches of light. They halted suddenly on the edge and peered through the tree trunks, holding their breath. There stood the trolls. 3 large trolls. One was stooping, and the other 2 stood staring at him. Strider walked forward unconcernedly. "Get up, old stone," he said, and broke his stick upon the stooping troll. Nothing happened. There was a gasp of astonishment from the hobbits, and then even Frodo laughed. "Well," he said, "we are forgetting our family history. These must be the very 3 that were caught by Gandalf, quarreling over the right way to cook 13 dwarves and 1 hobbit." "I had no idea we were anywhere near the place," said Pippin. He knew the story well. Bilbo and Frodo had told it often, but as a matter of fact, he had never more than half believed it. Even now, he looked at the stone trolls with suspicion, wondering if some magic might not suddenly bring them to life again. "You are forgetting not only your family history, but all you ever knew about trolls," said Strider. "It is broad daylight with a bright sun, and yet you come back trying to scare me with a tale of live trolls waiting for us in this glade." Oh,
that's so great.
Classic stuff right there.
Family history.
And not to mention what we all know about trolls.
Yeah. Although it's interesting because before the end of the War of the Rings, Sauron will have some trolls that can walk in daylight, won't he?
Yeah.
I think that's in Appendix F.
It is. And again, probably bred with some other creature.
I'm sure, yeah.
Terrifying thought, yeah.
But everything we know about trolls right now should tell us, there's no way these guys are alive with the sun high in the sky. And Strider's just so cool about it. I mean, there we get some of that, just that weird, dry sense of humor he's got. Like,
oh, I know.
Oh,
just
you see some trolls? All right, let's go take care of the trolls.
Get
it's
up,
like the
old
kind of
stone.
Thing,
Flack.
It's the kind of thing I would do, like messing around with my kids or something.
Yeah,
you know?
That's exactly what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
Like, I know so much more than you, and I'm going to mock you in a very sly, sort of underhanded way by demonstrating your foolishness, yes.
Yep. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about trolls. And I want to go back to something in Doug Anderson's Annotated Hobbit for a minute here.
Mm-hmm.
In the chapter of The Hobbit with the Trolls, that's chapter 2, Roast Mutton, Doug Anderson says that in February of 1926, a friend and colleague of Tolkien's, Helen Buckhurst, read a paper called Icelandic Folklore to a Viking Research Society. Okay. And in the paper, she talks about trolls in Icelandic lore. Now, according to her paper, trolls in Icelandic lore are huge, misshapen creatures bearing some resemblance to human form, but always hideously ugly. They are almost always malignant in disposition.
Well, if you were always hideously ugly, you'd probably also be malignant in disposition, but you know.
If you couldn't walk around in the sun, you might feel malignant in disposition too.
That's true. That's true. Well, Anderson says that she goes on to point out, this Helen Buckhurst, that some kinds of trolls have no power except during the hours of darkness. During the day, they must remain hidden in their caves, for the rays of the sun turn them into stone. So this, again, just is Icelandic lore.
Yeah. Sort of the bones of Tolkien's idea that they can't walk in the daylight.
Right. She then gives a lengthy example of a folk tale, which I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will read the last stanza. A girl has been doing a little singing battle with this thing outside the window, and that's all it's described as, on Yule. And at the end of this song battle, her last verse, she sings, "Dawn now hath caught thee, a stone shalt thou be, and no man henceforth shall be harmed by thee." When people came back to the house, they saw a great stone standing between the ridges of the roof, and there it has stood ever since, according to that particular story.
That is super cool. And that gives a lot more background for the story in chapter 2, where Gandalf keeps the trolls going until sunup. And,
right.
And that's what does them in.
Dawn hath caught thee, a stone shalt thou be.
Yeah.
And it goes back to 1926. Really cool stuff.
Very cool.
Yeah. So now, of course, Frodo recognizes the scene from The Hobbit. He's like, oh, yeah, I knew about this. And now is where we want to go ahead and introduce something that we thought about when we first came across the troll hole. And that's this description of the troll hole and comparing the one from The Hobbit, the description from The Hobbit, to the description here. Granted, it might have made sense then, but we didn't want to spoil that discovery by discussing the passage from The Hobbit until now. Yeah. Right.
And by the way, I just love saying the phrase troll hole. It's just fun to say. It's got a little sing-songy quality. Well, let me go back to the passage in The Hobbit, again from chapter 2, where we see the inside of the troll hole described. It said, "Then the stone door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor, and a nasty smell was in the air. But there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on shelves and on the ground, among an untidy litter of plunder of all sorts, from brass buttons to pots full of gold coins standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes, too, hanging on the walls. Too small for trolls. I am afraid they belonged to victims, and among them were several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes."
I love that. We get a little bit of that narrator aside thing that we used to get in The Hobbit. I'm afraid they belong to victims.
Yeah.
Let me spell it out for you. And that was right before they found Glamdring and Orcus, by the way.
Right. Yep, those were among those swords.
Now, in this chapter, we saw, but we didn't read it, they did not go far, for on the floor lay many old bones, and nothing else was to be seen near the entrance except some great empty jars and broken pots. So it seems like maybe others have come and pilfered the place since then. I mean, Bilbo and the dwarves took the pots of gold and some of the food, but it seems like even now the clothes are long gone too.
I can't imagine anyone wanting to wear clothes that they found in a troll hole.
Troll victims
that were hanging on a dead body at some point.
Yeah.
But, nothing about the nasty smell this time around, though. So I'm guessing 77 years is probably about how long it takes to air out a troll hole. I don't know.
You and your obsession about the smells of Middle-earth, Shawn. I'm beginning to worry about you. Yeah.
It is a thing of mine. I am olfactorily inclined.
Olfactorily. Well played.
Thank you.
Goodness. And then we're not going to read this last little bit of Strider. I do love the line about the bird's nest behind his ear. I think that's
Isn't that
brilliant.
Great? That would be a most unusual ornament.
That would be. Yeah. That would be, indeed.
Hilarious. Again, so many clues that Pippin and Merry could have picked up on. But, they're not used to being out in this kind of situation.
They're not.
This is Strider's element, and I'm sure he's passed these trolls many times.
I do like, though, how this whole experience, this whole thing has just lightened their hearts again. We get the same thing. Frodo felt his spirits reviving. The sun is warm and comforting. Even that mist that we talked about before is lifting a little bit. And they take their midday meal right under the shadow of the troll's legs, which is funny in a way. Like, I guess they've got some shadow there, some shade.
You're right. That is kind of funny. It's just like, now there's no danger here.
There's no harm. I'm going to.
In fact, it's probably a pretty safe place to be, because any brigands or anybody who happens by there who doesn't know that those trolls, are stone,
they're going to see the trolls and run away.
Yeah, pretty safe.
Yeah, safe. All right, Shawn. I'm going to go ahead and have you pick up there, though.
Okay. "Won't somebody give us a bit of a song while the sun is high?" said Merry when they had finished. "We haven't had a song or a tale for days." Not since Weathertop, said Frodo. The others looked at him. Don't worry about me, he added. I feel much better, but I don't think I could sing.
I feel better.
I walked right into that one.
Yeah, well, actually, Frodo did. But,
did,
you know, we've got the Python thing going for some reason today.
We do.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's great. I feel much better, but I don't think I could sing. Perhaps Sam could dig something out of his memory. Come on, Sam, said Merry. There's more stored in your head than you let on about. I don't know about that, said Sam. But how would this suit? It ain't what I call proper poetry, if you understand me. Just a bit of nonsense. But these old images here brought it to my mind. Standing up, with his hands behind his back as if he was at school, he began to sing to an old tune.
A troll sat alone on his seat of stone, and munched and mumbled a bare old bone. For many a year he'd gnawed it near, for meat was hard to come by, some by, gum by. In a cave in the hills he dwelt alone, and meat was hard to come by. Up came John with his big boots on, says he to the troll, Pray, what is yon? For it looks like the shin of min Uncle Jim, as should be a loin in graveyard, caveyard, paveyard. This many a year has Jim been gone, and I thought he were loin in graveyard.
I love that.
Man.
Absolutely love that.
So glad that I'm not going to sing after that, because I could never possibly do that justice.
So am I.
I'm going to read a couple of stanzas, but
yeah.
Did you notice that the professor said Jim? He changed the name from Tim to Jim.
And from Tom to John.
Yeah.
And there was also another change in the first verse. Instead of for me it was hard to come by, done by, gum by, it was something else. I don't remember what word he used instead of done by. It was different.
That was just subtle, but
I think it was from. There have been a lot of changes.
There's so many, and we're going to talk about some of that. But that's interesting. It's a slightly different version, but it's really close to the finished poem, and there were other versions that were much different, so
much further apart. Yeah, you're right.
That's very cool, though. All right, well, let me go ahead and try and follow that with a little
without
reading
singing.
Yeah, and I'm going to pick up a few stanzas later, near the end.
Yeah.
But just as he thought his dinner was caught, he found his hands had hold of naught. Before he could mind, Tom slipped behind and gave him the boot to larn him. Warn him, darn him. A bump of the boot on the seat, Tom thought, would be the way to larn him. But harder than stone is the flesh and bone of a troll that sits in the hills alone. As well set your boot to the mountain's root, for the seat of a troll don't feel it. Peel it, heel it. Old Troll laughed when he heard Tom groan, and he knew his toes could feel it.
Man, I'm tempted to sing. His game said so, he came. Anyway, no, I'm not going to sing. All right.
That's a fun poem. I love that.
That is a fun poem. I really enjoy listening to that. That is a hoot.
And it was originally not going to be here, was it? It was originally going to be sung by Frodo at the Prancing Pony.
Yeah, this was going to be the one that he sung while standing on the table and falling and slipping the ring on. And we talked about this back then in episode 124. The Troll Song was based on a poem that Tolkien wrote called The Root of the Boot that was included in the very rare Songs for the Philologists. Now, that was printed in 1936, but the poem is actually much older than that. Tolkien wrote it in 1926 as Boot and Bottom, which I love.
Yeah, quite descriptive.
Exactly. Rather straightforward, Boot and Bottom. It sounds like maybe a good name for a pub.
Boot and Bottom, yeah, actually, Bottom. It really
maybe
is.
A country western bar, though, actually.
Meet you down at the Boot and Bottom.
Yeah. For those without Songs for the Philologist, which is all of us, The Root of the Boot is available in Douglas Anderson's The Annotated Hobbit.
Yes, that's right.
As well as in The Return of the Shadow, with some additional corrections made by Tolkien later.
And just as a heads up for people, the version of the poem that's published here in the chapter in Lord of the Rings is also printed as The Stone Troll in The Adventures of Tom Bombadil.
That's right.
I highly recommend reading the earlier version, the Root of the Boot, that's in those other couple of volumes. It's always interesting to see the evolution of these poems in Tolkien's work.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
And you know, the Root of the Boot does have a sort of a different feel from this poem. It's got a little bit of a different rhyme scheme.
A little bit,
it's got a wonderful discussion on the fate of mine Uncle Tim's soul in the afterlife, which I think is
That's
fascinating.
right. It is funny, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
It is a lot of fun. And just a slightly different feel. Clearly a similar poem, clearly related, but
yeah.
There's always these little nuances, and that's a lot of fun.
It is neat. I love the fact that Sam's made this up in the story. I mean, I know Tolkien wrote it in 1926, but I love that in the story, it's not Sam reciting an old poem. It's Sam that's made it up.
Yeah, that's true.
I absolutely love that. Sam really does have, as Frodo said, more in his head than he lets on about.
Yeah, absolutely. And Frodo, I love we're getting a little bit ahead of the end of the poem, but like a couple of paragraphs down, Frodo talks about there's more to Sam than meets the eye,
Yeah.
First he was a conspirator, now he's a jester. He'll end up by becoming a wizard or a warrior. But
well, he does.
Super cool and a great poem. And I know we probably want to talk about a couple of things in the poem, don't we?
In fact, that's actually what I was going to do next, was to ask you to do a little word nerdery on some of the things in the poem.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff with the poem. Really interesting rhyme scheme here. Kind of, Tolkien does a few of these kind of complicated rhyme schemes. I'm thinking of something like the Errantry poem, the Eärendil poem we'll get to in a next chapter.
Yay!
At the beginning of next
season. I know
season.
that's a while away. But
I know it is a while away, but still, it's soon in podcast time. But you see like the fifth line in each stanza is basically just a bit of nonsense, Sam might say, to rhyme with the fourth line.
Right.
Possible exception to that being "warn him, darn him," which actually does have
it's true.
Does have some meaning, I would say.
Yeah. Done by, gum by, cave yard, pave yard, tin bone, thin bone. Yeah, no, but
peel it,
warn him, darn
him
certainly does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the little rhyming within the line on the first line of each, just as he thought his dinner was caught, and then how that rhymes with the end of the second line.
Yeah.
That's a really neat little like music.
It's like a half line rhyme. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we repeat that again with the third line, but not with the fourth. So before you could mine, Tom slipped
will
behind.
Go down sweet. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's just neat. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Very fun.
He thinks in half lines. He kind of writes it in half lines. Like the Anglo-Saxon poetry that has the half lines. Of course, that doesn't usually rhyme. But he kind of takes that half line structure and makes them rhyme. It's so cool.
It really is. Well, one of the things that we wanted to talk about here was this idea about mine Uncle Tim. Mine Uncle is, as you probably guessed, a play on mine uncle.
Yeah.
Just to be real clear, I wanted to pause that. Hammond and Scull tell us that Tolkien is making a comment on the practice in Middle English whereby the N of a preceding indefinite article an, or the possessive pronoun mine, was frequently transferred to a following word beginning with a vowel. Those silly Middle Englishers.
This actually was very common in Middle English. Yeah. It actually has a name. It's called meta-analysis, or rebracketing is kind of the more common name for it.
Yeah.
And it's just the kind of thing that naturally happens. And if you think this through, it makes a lot of sense. When people say common phrases like mine uncle all the time, over time, people in certain regions, certain dialects, stop thinking of it as mine uncle and start thinking of it as my nuncle. Yeah. And especially when they don't see it written,
And that's the key, isn't it? When it's not a written language and you're not reading it.
Exactly. Yeah. There's very low literacy. And so most people are just going to start thinking of it as my nuncle.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of examples of this, a lot of things that have crept into modern English through Middle English. For example, if anybody out there has a nickname was originally an eek name, an additional name, because eek means additional.
Okay.
So that's one place where this has crept up. It's also happened in the opposite direction. One of my favorite examples, an N was actually removed from a word.
Oh, okay.
The snake that we call adder, an adder, was originally, in Middle English, a natter.
Oh, very interesting.
Isn't that cool?
Look at that natter over there.
Yeah, exactly. Old English word for that was natter. And yeah, if you're a fan of Rowan Atkinson and Blackadder, maybe that first season probably should have been Black Natter, because that took place in the Middle Ages. Yes, that whole thing was set up just so I could make that joke. I'm sorry.
I wondered about that.
So sorry.
It was well done, though.
Thank you.
One other thing, the line that the troll says, for a couple of pins, I'll eat thee too and gnaw thy shins. Hammond and Scull mentioned that pin is often used to mean something of little value. A pin is essentially worthless. And so the troll is saying, it's not going to take much for me to eat you too, Tom.
Okay, cool. Yeah. That's a cool one. Yeah. There's a few other things in there, like, larn is a dialectical form of learn.
Yeah.
I'm sure folks have heard that one before. That one comes up in American English every once in a while. Boned is slang for stole, made off with.
Okay.
Nothing more than that.
Stole from its owner. Right. Yep. Exactly.
There's also something cool in there. I noticed there's a reference to the earlier title, The Root of the Boot.
Yes.
In this line, set your boot to the mountain's root.
Absolutely.
So that was a lot of fun as I was just reading. I picked up on that.
Yeah, but nothing about the original version, nothing about boot and bottom. Well, kind of. I mean, he doesn't say
He doesn't say bottom, does he?
He says boot on the seat.
Yeah. He actually uses rumpo in one.
That's right.
One version of it. Kicked him in the rumpo or booted him in the rumpo or something, which is kind of fun.
Good stuff. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pick up shortly after that, and we're gonna discuss real briefly this gold that we had talked about before, aren't we?
All right. Oh yeah. The famous gold.
Yeah. In the afternoon, they went on down the woods. They were probably following the very track that Gandalf, Bilbo, and the dwarves had used many years before. After a few miles, they came out on the top of a high bank above the road. At this point, the road had left the Horwell far behind in its narrow valley, and now clung close to the feet of the hills, rolling and winding eastward among woods and heather-covered slopes towards the ford and the mountains. Not far down the bank, Strider pointed out a stone in the grass. On it, roughly cut and now much weathered, could still be seen dwarf runes and secret marks. "There," said Merry. "That must be the stone that marked the place where the troll's gold was hidden. How much is left of Bilbo's share, I wonder, Frodo?" Frodo looked at the stone and wished that Bilbo had brought home no treasure more perilous nor less easy to part with. "None at all," he said. "Bilbo gave it all away. He told me he did not feel it was really his, as it came from robbers." So we'll get to the gold thing in a little bit, but let's start with that track, the exact same track that Gandalf and Bilbo and the dwarves used all those years ago. 77 years now at this point?
Yeah. Yep.
My goodness.
It's been such a long time.
Guess we should be going. Yeah, needed to throw a Boston reference in there, apparently.
Every once in a while, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. We should have done that when Smaug was blowing his flames. We could have brought out smoking.
Oh, see, yeah. My Boston knowledge only goes so far. I'm going to get some emails about that, I'm sure.
Yes, you will. So, you've got a little bit on this road and some of the differences early on, huh?
Yeah, there's a little bit here. In the first edition of the book, this bit about the road having left the Horwell in its narrow valley was a bit different. It actually read, "The road had turned away from the river down in its narrow valley, and now clung close to the feet of the hills, rolling and winding northward among woods." Now, Hammond and Scull point out that the second edition Ballantine publication really messed this up with a couple of errors. They actually had, in the second edition Ballantine, actually had, "The road had left the Harwell," double A.
H-A-A-R-well, yeah.
Yeah, far behind the river, eventually rolling and winding lastward among woods. Which
far behind the river. So it had left the river far behind the river.
Far behind, yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and then lastward among woods.
Oh, my goodness.
Quite a bit going on
instead of northward, right.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it got changed anyway. In the first edition, it was rolling northward. Now it's eastward. These errors would get fixed pretty quickly by the second printing of the second edition.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher would later note that the changes in the second edition were, quote, "clearly another accommodation to the published map," and he called it not an entirely happy solution. Granted, it was probably happier than publishing altogether new maps, but there you have it.
Yeah, and I think we talked last time, too, about just the challenges in having to publish new maps and some of the ways the publishers tried to get around that.
It's easier to change the text than to change the maps.
Yeah.
It's still not a happy solution, as Christopher said, but it, approximates one.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely not an ideal way to go about it, but like you say, it's easier to update the text sometimes.
Right. So let's see. What do we have here? Oh, Strider pointing out the stone. So I wanted to pull this from The Hobbit, from Roast Mutton. And here's the line from that. "They brought up their ponies and carried away the pots of gold and buried them very secretly, not far from the track by the river, putting a great many spells over them, just in case they ever had the chance to come back and recover them."
That's right.
That's
right. We talked about that.
And secret marks are.
Yeah.
Those are the spells.
That's right. We talked about that. That's awesome.
That really is cool to come back and
about
see
the dwarf
that.
spells, and then they're still there. Super cool.
That is neat.
And then Merry asks the obvious question.
Yeah.
How much is left of Bilbo's share of the gold?
None at all. And not that he spent it all, but that he gave it away. He didn't feel like it could be his. Yeah.
I love that. We talked so much about Bilbo's honesty and his generosity in the discussion of The Hobbit, and here he is. Sort of his conscience is taking over, and he just can't he can't keep it. It came from robbers.
No, absolutely.
So good for him.
Yeah.
And Frodo's little poignant moment where he wishes that Bilbo had brought home no treasure more perilous.
Oh, Oh, I know.
If only he just brought back that stolen gold.
And no ring. Yeah.
And no ring. Yep.
How his life would be so different today.
Mm-hmm.
He certainly wouldn't be out here all the way out.
That is true. That is
near
true.
the River Orwell.
Although Bilbo wouldn't have lived as long as he lived.
No, that's true too.
He would have had Frodo would have had a totally different life, really. You think about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely, radically different life. Who knows? He might never have even been adopted by Bilbo because Bilbo might have been too old to do that.
Could be.
Yeah. My goodness. I don't even want to think about all that. Everything changes, huh?
Yeah.
And then Sauron finds the ring and everybody dies anyway. So let's.
Sauron captures Gollum with the ring. Yeah.
There we go. Well, let's go ahead and get back to the road. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and have you pick up.
Okay. The road lay quiet under the long shadows of early evening. There was no sign of any other travelers to be seen. As there was now no other possible course for them to take, they climbed down the bank, and turning left went off as fast as they could. Soon a shoulder of the hills cut off the light of the fast westering sun. A cold wind flowed down to meet them from the mountains ahead. They were beginning to look out for a place off the road where they could camp for the night, when they heard a sound that brought sudden fear back into their hearts, the noise of hoofs behind them.
Mm.
They looked back, but they could not see far because of the many windings and rollings of the road. As quickly as they could, they scrambled off the beaten way and up into the deep heather and bilberry brushwood on the slopes above, until they came to a small patch of thick-growing hazels. As they peered out from among the bushes, they could see the road, faint and gray in the failing light, some 30 feet below them. The sound of hoofs drew nearer. They were going fast, with a light clippity-clippity-clip. Then, faintly, as if it was blown away from them by the breeze, they seemed to catch a dim ringing, as of small bells tinkling.
Small bells tinkling.
That's interesting, small bells tinkling.
We'll have to discuss that in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start at the beginning of that. Clearly, most of the day is gone. We're talking about late afternoon, right? The setting sun, the light gets cut off by the hills. We've got a cold wind, so we know we're nearing the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And they're pretty far off the road in terms of height. They're 30 feet above. That's the height of a good 3-story building.
That's true.
So they've got good visibility. They're buried in a thicket of hazels, I think it was, right? Patch with hazels, yeah.
Yeah.
I love this description, by the way, all the flora, the deep heather, the bilberry brushwood,
yeah.
And then the hazels, yeah. That's neat.
Yeah.
Very evocative. I can see all of those as they grow.
It's a very sensory moment with the description of the plants, the onomatopoeia of the hoofs.
Yeah.
Clippity, clippity, clip.
We got caught out by that again.
Once again.
Only a matter of time. I'm sure it'll happen to me too.
And the tinkling of the bells is just so much sensory information here. But yeah, let's talk about that.
I mean, you hear the bells and you think, well, that can't be a black rider.
No.
I mean, I guess it could be. The Witch King could be like, dang it, did my daughter put her My Little Pony stuff on my black steed again? Now I probably have glitter all over my robe. I mean, pretty unlikely.
Man, if the Witch King has a daughter, I feel sorry for her.
Yeah, well.
If the Witch King has a daughter, I will start a fund for her to buy all the My Little Pony stuff she wants.
She absolutely, you're right.
That little girl deserves it.
She sure does. I just like the idea of glitter all over his robes, though. I just think that's hilarious.
That's hilarious, yeah. Wearing a little Twilight Sparkle headdress that his daughter put on him.
We each have daughters, and I'm sure we each have had more glitter in our homes than we care to acknowledge.
I've actually had to wear a Rainbow Dash mane before.
Oh, so, well, okay. Yeah. That makes one of you.
The things we do for our little girls.
Yeah, not that. I would do anything for love, but I won't do that.
I was hoping you would go to that. Oh, it was so great. Yeah.
Yeah, I've even tried to ban glitter in this house. It's nigh unto impossible because it just comes home from school.
It gets everywhere, and you can never get rid of it.
No, you can't. And my son, his hair, it definitely doesn't work well with him because it sticks in his hair no matter how many times you would try to wash it out.
I bet.
But yeah. Anyway, we digress.
Yes, we do.
Oh, goodness.
But Strider, he knows what's going on.
He does.
He has a good feeling about this.
I love
that. I have a good feeling about this.
A hand to his ear and a look of joy on his face. That's great. Mm-hmm. When Strider's happy and actually smiling, which is apparently a very rare thing, it would seem, because he's very rational and doesn't panic or freak out when things are bad, he also tends to not be very very happy when things are good.
He doesn't get excited about things.
No, he's very stoic in many ways.
I don't think Strider says yippee once in the book.
No, Strider never says yippee. You're right. But he does have a look of joy on his face, and I like that. And that's where I'm going to go ahead and pick up.
Okay.
The light faded, and the leaves on the bushes rustled softly. Clearer and nearer now the bells jingled, and clippity-clip came the quick trotting feet. Suddenly into view below came a white horse, gleaming in the shadows, running swiftly. In the dusk, its headstall flickered and flashed, as if it were studded with gems like living stars. The rider's cloak streamed behind him, and his hood was thrown back. His golden hair flowed shimmering in the wind of his speed. To Frodo it appeared that a white light was shining through the form and raiment of the rider, as if through a thin veil. Strider sprang from hiding and dashed down towards the road, leaping with a cry through the heather, but probably not a cry of yippee, as we've discussed.
No, he wouldn't do that.
But even before he had moved or called, the rider had reined in his horse and halted, looking up towards the thicket where they stood. When he saw Strider, he dismounted and ran to meet him, calling out, "I na vedui dunadan, my gavanin." His speech and clear ringing voice left no doubt in their hearts. The rider was of the elven folk. No others that dwelt in the wide world had voices so fair to hear. But there seemed to be a note of haste or fear in his call, and they saw that he was now speaking quickly and urgently to Strider.
Awesome.
I love that arrival.
Awesome. Nice little bit of Cinderin in there, too. Well done.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. I'm just glad I got it right.
Yep, you did.
Clippity-clip, you mean? Was that the Cinderin you're talking
about?
Yeah,
that's old Cinderin word for...
Old Cinderin, yeah.
Yeah.
Horse trot. Clippity-clip, yeah. No, just great stuff, though. What a moment. The white horse.
And
I mean,
this
just
image.
The white. Oh.
Yeah. This image of this guy. Can we name him? We haven't named him yet.
Oh, actually, we're going to be naming him in the discussion. So, let's go ahead. Glorfindel is just, what a moment his arrival is.
Such a great moment. I mean, this light that Frodo sees.
It's interesting that it's mentioned specifically that it's
to Frodo. It appeared.
And we'll learn why later on, but yeah.
Yeah, we will. I love this appearance of the head stall flickered and flashed as if it were studded with gems like living stars.
Oh, beautiful.
Remember how close a connection the elves have with stars. Elves are the people of the stars, the Eldar.
Yes.
They almost always in Tolkien's books, the first time you see elves, you see stars.
Yeah.
Now, this is not the first time we've seen elves in this book, but as Glorfindel arrives, we see stars again, and it's super
And he is
cool.
no ordinary elf either.
And he is no ordinary elf, and we'll get into some of that next episode.
Yeah. But that headstall, there's been some interesting stuff about that, isn't there?
Yeah, there has. And in the first edition, this little bit about the headstall actually did read differently. That text was, "Its bit and bridle flickered and flashed." But leave it to one of Tolkien's most observant early readers, Rona Bear, to write to him. She wrote to him pointing a little something out. She said, "Why is Glorfindel's horse described as having a bridle and bit, when elves ride without bit, bridle, or saddle?"
That is a good question. And Tolkien answered it in letter 211 in 1958. I love his answer, by the way. He says, "I could, I suppose, answer, a trick cyclist can ride a bicycle with handlebars, but actually bridle was casually and carelessly used for what I suppose should have been called a headstall. Or rather, since bit was added long ago, I had not considered the natural ways of elves with animals. Glorfindel's horse would have an ornamental headstall, carrying a plume, and with the straps studded with jewels and small bells. But Glorfindel would certainly not use a bit. I will change bridle and bit to headstall."
There you go.
First, I love the initial answer. Just because they don't have to use them doesn't mean they can't use them.
Doesn't mean they can't use them. They could. Why not?
Yeah, it might be more helpful. And we'll get into that, I think, at much more length in the next episode. But
yeah,
I particularly love the serious observation that, oh, no, this is really what happened. And then the recognition that change would be appropriate. Can you imagine? I mean, seriously imagine writing to Tolkien about something like this and having him say, "You know what? Sure, I'm going to change that in the next edition." I mean, whoa!
Imagining
Yikes.
Professor Tolkien saying, "You know what? You're right."
Point. Yeah.
Okay.
Man.
I mean, kind of shows you the kind of relationship he had with his fans, doesn't it? I mean, I know
particularly knowledgeable and
at certain times some of his fans did frustrate him.
Yes,
particularly later on. But yeah, those who were attentive, he really did appreciate it. And that's really cool.
That really is. I mean, people, I think, who write to us with corrections, I've seen a few people be like, hey, I was mentioned on the show. Like that's a big deal. Trust me, it's not a big deal. I mean, really, we're happy to do it. But
we are.
But can you imagine actually writing to Tolkien
with a correction and him saying, "Yep, you're right.
I'm going to fix that." Oh my goodness!
I mean, we're just us. This is Tolkien we're talking about.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Well, you already mentioned the white light. I love that moment.
Yeah.
And we're going to learn more about that in the next episode.
We will learn more about that next chapter, but just just a hint. That's Glorfindel, the way he is on the other side. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next time around.
And what that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Strider running down to meet him. The slightly, in a little bit of a way, terrifying that even before Strider had moved or called, Glorfindel had reined in his horse and halted, looking directly at them. I know where you are.
Wow, yeah.
I mean, before he'd even moved.
You guys aren't as well hidden as you think.
Right. But I do love that Strider just runs down to meet him. We get that Sindarin quote, "Hail at last, Dunedain, well met," is what the translation would mean.
Mm-hmm.
And that no others had voices so fair to hear. Oh,
lovely.
Something musical, just in the mechanics of how they speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Just their voices, beautiful voices.
Absolutely wonderful.
His is he's a little nervous right now. There's a note of haste or fear in his call.
Absolutely, and for good reason, as we'll find out.
We'll find out about that next time.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm hearing the sound of hoofs and jingling bells myself, so let's go ahead and wrap up this discussion and go see who's looking for us. Folks, be sure to come back next week when we meet everybody's favorite elf who didn't make the movies.
I really wish the hobbits had asked him if Balrogs have wings. If anybody would know.
He would know.
But folks, before we reach into Barliman's bag, we want to take just a minute to let you know where the Fellowship of the Podcast stands. We've reached our most recent goal of setting up a monthly Discord hangout with the two of us. By the time this episode airs, our first one will have already taken place. But if you're interested in joining us either for an unrecorded off-the-cuff conversation or for a live episode recording, or both, you'll want to get signed up before Season 4 starts.
And what's next for the Prancing Pony Podcast and our patrons? Well, we'll be working on that during our upcoming hiatus, so please be sure to stay tuned. In the meantime, if you're looking for a new Tolkien book, please check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we've assembled a set of links to all the books we've mentioned on the show.
And if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes, we'd be grateful. That increases our visibility, which means more new listeners, and that means more great questions for Barliman, more discussion on social media, and an even more vibrant Tolkien community.
And speaking of social media, we really do appreciate it when you share us.
We do.
Whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever you might find Tolkien fans, it's always a good thing to see us out there. Now, with all that done, it's time to see what Barliman has in the mailbag for us tonight. Shawn?
Well, I think we'll have time for a few today, and we'll go ahead and start with Jessica F. from Arkansas, who wrote to us regarding some of our comments on how the One Ring stretches the mortals who possess it. She offered some of her own thoughts in an email, and then she came to this point. She said, "Since elves live as long as Arda lives, and the Maiar and Valar are immortal, I can't imagine the ring would affect them in the same way," meaning the stretching, of course. Their lives are already immortal, so there's nothing for the ring to stretch. Perhaps the stretching in mortals occurs because the ring was made by a Maia for a Maia. It was never meant for mortals, so there are consequences to them possessing it. I still wonder if elves would experience any other effects, perhaps a mental weariness or something of that nature. Or maybe, like the Maiar, they would only experience the desire to save the world through domination, as Galadriel imagined, with the caveat that they would eventually become another Dark Lord or Dark Lady. So there's some really good thoughts there, and a subtle question in that statement about this idea of, would one of the elves get stretched if they possess the One Ring? Or is there truly nothing to stretch? And if they're not stretched, well, would they experience any other effects on their Hroa or their Fea? Alan, what do you think?
Well, I have to agree with her assumption that there's nothing to stretch. We've talked about this before. The stretching effect comes from the fact that, well, as Tolkien said in a footnote to Letter 131, see, it's not a Prancing Pony Podcast episode if we haven't mentioned Letter 131.
Absolutely.
So according to that, Tolkien said that each kind has a natural span, integral to its biological and spiritual nature. For man, this cannot really be increased qualitatively or quantitatively, so that prolongation in time is like stretching a wire out ever tauter or spreading butter ever thinner. It becomes an intolerable torment. So, in other words, the ring doesn't so much add to somebody's lifespan as it does stretch out the life that one should have over a longer period of time.
Right.
But Since elves, though, they already have serial longevity, or immortality as we might call it, they naturally live as long as Arda exists. They can't be stretched past that span, so there's really nothing to stretch.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. What about other effects? Do you think the elves would experience any kind of mental weariness or something like that, like Jessica suggests?
Well, I mean, to be honest, elves already are kind of burdened with that mental weariness, aren't they?
True.
Just over the course of their ordinary life in Arda.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a letter number 156 to Father Robert Murray. Tolkien actually uses the word weariness. He talks about the weariness of time, and death is a release from that, which elves don't get under normal circumstances.
Right.
And then there's letter 181 to Michael Straight. In that one, Tolkien also speaks of the fact that nothing is left for the elves after the destruction of the ring except for weariness. So this mental weariness is a very real problem for the elves as they continue on in the world, either with or without the One Ring in existence. Now, would possessing the One Ring increase that weariness? Well, maybe. Tolkien says in a few letters, 131, 181, and 208 at least, that the natural temptation of the elves is to regret the past and to become unwilling to face change, to desire to halt time or slow decay. Now, we can only speculate, but it seems reasonable that just as the One Ring, or the 9 for that matter, enhance the natural temptation to seek power among men, or the 7 enhance the natural temptation towards wealth among the dwarves, while the One Ring would enhance that natural temptation among elves to regret the past, to become obsessed with the past, to the point where continuing on in the world would become even more wearying than it naturally does.
That's interesting. I mean, as you say, we can only speculate, of course, but it does seem reasonable.
Yeah.
You know, I'm also reminded of Tolkien's words from letter 246. That was actually a draft letter to Eileen Elgar about how if Gandalf got the ring, and we've talked about this before, if Gandalf got the ring, how he would be self-righteous and would have made good detestable and seem evil. Now, that's a Maya, not an elf. But in that same letter, Tolkien does speak a little bit about what would happen if Elrond or Galadriel had gotten the One Ring.
Mm-hmm.
He says that Elrond or Galadriel would have proceeded in the policy now adopted by Sauron. They would have built up an empire with great and absolutely subservient generals and armies and engines of war until they could challenge Sauron and destroy him by force.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't exactly answer Jessica's specific question, but you can kind of start to piece together an answer from some of these little bits of information. You know, with that information of what an Elrond or Galadriel would do if they had the ring, combined with, what Gandalf would become, you can really start to imagine a being with that kind of power and that kind of, like you were talking about, sort of a ring-enhanced pathological obsession with preserving the past. And it's kind of terrifying, actually,
Yeah, that would be.
It would definitely be
a good thing.
It would be some sort, there would definitely be a drive towards power there. But they would disguise it as something
towards a different purpose.
Right.
But yes.
Yeah, but they would disguise it as something benign when it wouldn't be.
It would never be benign because it's the ring, right?
Yep.
Well, on the topic of different kinds being stretched, we got a question from Mark P. in Cleveland, Ohio, and he asked, if each race has its standard lifespan and using magic to extend that lifespan is unnatural, my question is, are the Dunedain affected by this stretching effect? They live thrice as long.
Well, there's an interesting fact about the footnote to the Waldman letter that you quoted just a moment ago about stretching a wire out ever tauter. Although that footnote makes reference to Bilbo's classic simile of butter scraped over too much bread, and therefore, that is applicable to the One Ring.
Cream cheese spread over too much bagel. That just wasn't a very good analogy.
It just doesn't work. It doesn't seem quite as
doesn't translate well. No,
a little too New York, but but yeah, that actually is a footnote to a paragraph about the Númenóreans and why they can't have immortality in Aman.
That's right.
Now, of course, that's immortality they're not allowed to have. The long life that the Númenóreans and their descendants have is something a little different. While Mark is definitely right that any unnatural means of prolonging a life would, or as far as we know, should cause this stretching effect, the long life of the Númenóreans is actually a gift from the Valar. The Valar themselves, under authority granted to them by Ilúvatar, gave them this long life.
That last part's important.
Yep. Yes, it is. It says near the beginning of Akalabaith, the Valar indeed may not withdraw the gift of death, which comes to men from Ilúvatar. But in the matter of the half-elven, Ilúvatar gave to them the judgment, and they judged that to the sons of Eärendil should be given choice of their own destiny. Now that's specific to Elrond and Elros, of course, and the passage goes on to talk about the choices that the two sons of Eärendil made.
Right.
But later in the Akalabaith, we're told, For though the Valar had rewarded the Dunedain with long life, they could not take from them the weariness of the world that comes at last, and they died.
That's right. Well, there's that weariness again, and a reminder that death is a gift that allows men to escape from that weariness.
Right.
One that Ilúvatar specifically did not give the Valar the authority to take away.
Right, and that distinction is key, because it shows that Ilúvatar is directly involved in these decisions of how the Valar are going to reward the Dunedain for their achievements in the First Age. The Valar don't do anything without Ilúvatar's permission, at least not in this case.
No, not like that, no.
So the Valar do have authority from Ilúvatar to extend the lives of the Dunedain, but they do not have authority to extend them indefinitely. And what that means is that the long life of the Dunedain, because it's done with Ilúvatar's authority, is not a stretching. It's more of a change to their nature, and that's the difference.
Yeah. Right. It's not magic. It's not an artificial means to do it.
Right.
And that's significant. And it's also significant, I think, that the weariness doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Who knows? They might have been able to have the Dunedain live for 1,000 years, but the truth is that when they got to about thrice the age of a normal man, they wearied of the world and laid themselves down.
They started to weary of it. Yeah.
Well, thank goodness that the Valar, weren't able to stretch the Dunedain.
It wouldn't have been pretty.
No, it wouldn't have been. Well, do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think we do. Matthew A. wrote to us with one that's actually quite appropriate to this episode.
Oh, good.
He said, "Why is Rivendell so hard to find from the Eriador side, but apparently simple to find the path coming over the Misty Mountains? Both in The Hobbit and in The Lord of the Rings, it always seems very difficult to find the way to Rivendell from Eriador, but there's never even a mention of any difficulty over the Misty Mountains from east to west. Do you think this is because it's really easier to get to Rivendell from the Misty Mountains, or were there more prominent markers across the mountains?"
Well, that's interesting. It does seem to be a real phenomenon. I mean, in this chapter, we've seen both in this episode and last week how the road, the ford over the River Bruinen, even the river itself at times are all hidden from view or hard to find, even for Strider, who, grew up in Rivendell.
If anybody should know, you'd think it would be him. Yeah.
I can't find my way home.
Right.
But even in Chapter 3 of The Hobbit, Gandalf, who himself is no stranger to the last homely house, he had trouble finding it from the west. He says, "Hidden somewhere ahead of us is the fair valley of Rivendell, where Elrond lives in the last homely house." And he's not exaggerating. The text says that it was not so easy as it sounds to find the last homely house west of the mountains. Even Gandalf, who seemed to know his way about pretty well, had trouble following the road, and that road itself was pretty treacherous ground. So it does seem to be that it's hard to find from the west. But Shawn, what about from the east?
Well, Bilbo's return journey in chapters 18 and 19 of The Hobbit does take him over the Misty Mountains, and he does seem to stroll right up to the brink of the valley without any trouble. Or rather, I should probably say his pony strolls. I think Bilbo's probably looking up at the stars and smelling elves again.
There you go again with the smell.
You know me and my smells, man.
Whoa, I don't want to know any more of those.
Me and my many smells. Didn't mean it like that.
Didn't think you did.
Nope. In The Lord of the Rings, though, it's a little less clear because Frodo and company don't actually come back west across the Misty Mountains. They actually ride through the Gap of Rohan, and then they come up to Rivendell from the south through Dunland and Eregion, and then Celeborn and Galadriel turn east, and they go back to Lothlorien, and then Frodo and the rest ride on north to Rivendell. So they're not really coming at it from across the mountains. They're coming at it from the south, and there's no indication that it's especially hard to find. But there is this little passage that suggests that they do kind of happen upon it suddenly. Check this out. At last one evening they came over the high moors, suddenly, as to travelers it always seemed, to the brink of the deep valley of Rivendell, and saw far below the lamps shining in Elrond's house. And they went down and crossed the bridge and came to the doors, and all the house was filled with light and song for joy at Elrond's homecoming.
Suddenly, as to travelers it always seemed. That is a very telling statement, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah. I mean, that tells me, and I think we have to infer, that Rivendell is always hard to find. Now, probably because of the bubble that Elrond's ring puts over the place or some other elvish art. Or, after all, hiding an entire settlement of people is kind of a family tradition for Elrond. But
that's true.
It does kind of seem like no matter what direction you're coming from, it is hard to find. Certainly from the west, seemingly from the south, and probably from the east, too. If you ask me, I think the reason for Tolkien not making a big deal about it on the return journeys is really more for narrative effect.
Okay, makes sense.
It's more important for the narrative to build suspense out of this search for Rivendell early on in the story when there's all this peril for the main characters and you're not sure if they're going to make it through their troubles and everything. By the end of the story, when the heroes have already completed their quest, it's just not that important to the narrative to show the suspense of finding Rivendell. And I think that's why Tolkien just kind of glosses over it.
That makes sense. That's a good explanation. I'm sure it's a lot less nerve-wracking to have to take your time looking for Rivendell when there isn't a bunch of Black Riders after you and a member of your party hasn't been stabbed by them.
I would think so.
Yeah. It's sort of, it's not as big a deal in the story, so it makes sense to do it that way. That makes me think, though, that passage from The Hobbit way back in chapter 3, things that are good to have and days that are good to spend are soon told about, and not much to listen to, while things that are uncomfortable, palpitating, and even gruesome may make a good tale and take a deal of telling anyway.
There you go. Yeah. I think that's a good call out. And I think, interestingly, that passage is actually about Rivendell, isn't it? I mean, it's about spending time there, not finding it, but I think it does fit well. I mean, it just doesn't make for a good tale to read at the end of the story that it took the heroes a week to find Rivendell when they weren't in any danger. Just like,
where did that town go? Yeah. Where did that whole little settlement of people go?
Yeah.
Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week when we see Frodo and his bravest in the conclusion of Book 1 of The Lord of the Rings.
And you'll see almost the conclusion of Season 3 of the Prancing Pony Podcast. But folks, we have one more exciting surprise in store after that.
And wouldn't you want to know what that is?
I bet you do.
Well, I'll tell you. Let me tell you, we are going to have an episode.
We're going to have a season finale, folks.
We're going to wrap it up, yes. You'll enjoy it either way.
And you'll find out more about what that's going to be next week.
Yeah, we'll tell you next week.
Yes, we will. But folks, for now, thanks again for listening. And thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it does not stop when the episode ends. See the comments, questions, occasional corrections, and more on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Less occasional than we'd like them to be.
Certainly lately. On Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, Chad in Texas, and Lance in New Jersey. Thank you all very much.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and, well, most of all, no shin bones, please, to Bartleman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And, well, we'll be sure to keep them out of our next show.
But this one belonged to my Uncle Tim. Come on.
Doesn't he need it still? Well, however long we've had, it is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.